welcome to the podcast. It is such a pleasure to have you here today.
Good to be on the show. Thanks, Dhruti.
Yeah. So, would love to dive right into your book, Tightrope to the Moon. You've drawn a fascinating link between childhood experiences and traits like mastery and resilience. I would love to hear a little bit more about that, especially how early stress responses shape us later in life. Can you unpack that a little bit for us?
Yeah, so I was working backwards from listening to stories that founders shared with me about their childhood,
Mhm.
and I was seeing a pattern there, not the pattern of necessarily the same kind of unwanted stress, but the pattern of their ability to actually deal with it better.
Mhm.
And um, Obviously, founders come from all sorts of backgrounds. Some have had the stress of poverty or inadequate parental attention. Some have had the stress of moving around too much between cities. Uh, all of them had one common thing working for them at that stage, which was they were able to show mastery in one field. So whether it was sports or one particular game,
Mhm.
particular subject, and that was something that they were cracking in life. And That was teaching them that they can control some part of their world by being very good at something.
Mhm.
And that being very good at something was then able to take care of the stress uh, that was attacking them. And the I guess why is this not such a common situation? Because every child would go through stress of different kinds.
Mhm.
Uh, but I think the repeated use of or repeated appearance of something where you gain mastery on one thing then gives you a long lasting sense of your own innate ability to handle stress, right? And that ability to handle stress then shows up much later in life in terms of your response systems, etc. When things are going. And the other thing which was common amongst all the founders I've spoken to was the presence of a human emotional support.
Yeah.
It could be grandparents or mother or brother or sibling. And
Mm.
the only thing that any of them had to do was just to keep a very strong word of you are wanted, you are, we love you. And this was just a single point of affirmation, which was giving them a great sense of control in that situation. So it is there are two ends to this. One is the just their let's say their cracking maths Olympiad, and the other is their whoever saying that we love you. These two things together kind of help them get to a point which was then a very strong place to take on the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's fascinating because what I'm also hearing is that there's a very clear sense of purpose, maybe, that kept them going. There was an innate drive to be able to excel in something,
Mhm.
whatever that is, but to excel in something. And of course, as animals instinct or as social animals, we always need that sense of being wanted, being loved for, being cared for. And when that purpose, along with that sense of I'm needed, I'm wanted, it kind of really builds your overall attitude towards what you end up doing. So if we think about it, if we fast forward this to adulthood, how have you seen these early patterns play out or influence how we lead or make decisions as adults, maybe as founders?
Yeah. So I mean, a founder's example is best because um, compared to most of us, I think the number of incidences of stress and then stress response uh, is way more for founders. That's why I wrote the book, because in some ways, uh, their way of handling stress is really what's determining the outcome
Mm-hmm.
of their startup and the trajectory of the company.
Yeah.
that it starts taking is actually almost fully correlated to what the stress response was.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and of course, with any stressful situation, the post facto behavior is very important.
Mm-hmm.
Do we become more defensive, less risk taking? Do we become extra risk taking because now we feel that we have survived this?
Mm-hmm.
And that's another biology theory in which winning against an opponent makes us feel, uh, I would say, more powerful than we may necessarily be. So every win then adds to a very strong sense of I can do this.
Hmm.
In some ways, the racking up of stresses, the quicker they are, which is, and again, it's a lot for a founder. Uh,
Hmm.
every time you win against a stress, your ability to take on the next stress increases.
Yeah.
So I mean, that is a typical founder life before we talk more about them. But uh, I think there are two phases of post-stress behavior for founders, right? One is a very short, immediate getting back on the saddle phase,
Yeah.
right? You've fallen off the saddle, and
Mm-hmm.
that can happen in most cases because of two reasons. One is something has gone wrong, not necessarily because of you, but let's say a bad hire or a new regulatory issue,
Mm-hmm.
and that's put the company, two steps back, and you weren't expecting it, and that's creating a lot of stress. Or money is running out, it's creating a lot of stress. And the second bucket is where, as a founder, you've taken the call to take the company in a certain direction.
Mm-hmm.
You decided to build the product which was um, running very closely against the regulations, but you said no, let's go ahead with it, let's take this risk.
Mm-hmm.
So in the second bucket, you're taking more personal ownership of the outcome. In the first
Yeah.
one, it is external environment, things do go wrong, and I may be disappointed, but it's not because of me.
Mm-hmm.
The response in two buckets or two parts. The first short one is very similar in both cases,
Yeah.
which is you're feeling low, you're feeling angry at someone because they messed up.
Yeah.
And I've heard founders actually talk about many activities that they would indulge in, which will get them back to their normal. Uh, and none of these, by the way, activities included going and have a drink
Yes.
or a
Hmm.
smoke, right? I mean,
Hmm.
they could be
Hmm.
part of it, but founders sooner or later get to know that anything which is numbing your response is not the right response.
Yeah.
So they are sharpening their response to that pain, and then
Mm-hmm.
the response is um, very much a reversion of or inversion of that negative event
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
into then going and taking on something which makes them punch above their body weight.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
This is a short term one, and I've heard of examples like somebody would like to go bowl very fast,
Mm-hmm.
go to the nets and start bowling like crazy, full force, full power, and they're exhausting themselves. Some people, uh, initial days they would do the very unfair thing of shouting at people or biting people's heads off.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and some would lock themselves in a room with their co-founder and have a shouting match and
Yeah.
come out feeling very good at the end of all of that shouting. So all kinds of reactions. And again, like I said, none of these reactions were meant to numb. It was to actually take out some frustration, and it was always very vigorous, like the
Mm-hmm.
bowling action.
Yeah.
People have told me, and one of them used the term vigorous action.
Mm-hmm.
So the uh, once you get back on the saddle, the most common second and longer phase was vigorous action as a common term, and which is doing a lot of activities, charging like a bull again at
Mm-hmm.
to rebuild. Uh,
Yeah.
the I would say the interesting thing again about your reaction in the short phase of getting back on the saddle
Mm.
is irrespective of where the issue came from, external or internal
Yeah.
decision led.
Mm.
It is how do you visualize the situation in your head.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of how you deal with a problem has to do with how do you define the problem and how do you say it in words in your own head
Yeah.
in terms of the intensity. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So most founders, again, I've seen tend to discount a problem. Like 99% of it will be discounted.
Mm-hmm.
It will never be like, oh my God, this is so bad.
Yeah.
Right? They will never use words which are uh, like fatalistic or or very, very scary. They will use very calm words in their
Mm-hmm.
own heads
Yeah.
that this is you can say nature of the business, or this keeps happening, or this is a minor blip. Now some people might read it as they're trivializing the problem,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
When a rational person will talk to a founder about a problem, they'll go away thinking they're trivializing the problem, but actually what the founder is doing is framing the problem in their heads in a way that does not become a mountain that's going to overtake everything.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Otherwise, their responses are going to change if that happens, right? They will respond to it very differently if they magnify the problem. So
Yeah.
I think the idea is to neutralize it by using the language that works for you. And
Mhm.
that's a very practical thing to do, which a lot of founders, I think, fail to do, but they learn over a period of time that them calling it out for what it is, it's not really helping them.
Mhm.
Yes, it is. It may seem insurmountable at this point in time. But
Mhm.
if you just break it down into smaller pieces, maybe things will, look not so drastic or not so, as you said, fatalistic in that sense. So
Mhm.
absolutely. So you also brought you asked a very compelling question actually in the book. And while I was reading it, it just stood out for me whether some people are just better at focusing their energy to chase big audacious dreams. So I was just also curious in terms of energy, based on the research and the chats that you've had with founders, what patterns have you noticed around that? And you did mention that the whole thing around vigorous action
Mhm.
is one way where they focus their energy on. Is there anything else that has stood out for you?
Yeah, I think everybody was very clear on the fact that the journey is a very painful journey. It needs a lot of sacrifices. And
Mm-hmm.
the uh, sacrifices better be compensated with something very big.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So for them, the justification or rationalization of taking on all the pain of building something was that something is going to be very big. Otherwise, it's not worth it.
Yeah.
Right. And the same thing will come to why do I need to get back on the saddle again? That it's unfinished business. Most people will not give up partly also because they feel that it's unfinished. Simple as that. Right?
Yeah.
It's not because it's hard or it's not going to happen. It's just it's unfinished. And there is no clear definition of what finished means, right? So most founders will tend to keep expanding the definition of what is finished. There's
Yeah.
nothing finished. In terms of energy, the starting point really is that the clarity of why are we doing this,
Mm-hmm.
and it better be worth. So it
Mm-hmm.
has to be big, and then I think as we know the sustenance of energy over very long periods of time is what I would call resilience, right?
Yeah.
It's not just good enough to stand up. Is good enough. It's required to. I mean, what is required is that you run at a certain speed again, right? After you've fallen.
Yeah.
Clean a startup, right? You can't have a period where you go into a low energy phase, especially for founders again, because people around them depend on them for their energy,
Yes.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So they cannot afford to turn the dynamo off.
Yeah.
And that would mean that they need to have a very good way of making sure that their energy levels are always high.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, so,
Isn't
so
that too much to take on in terms of, when you think about it from an energy level? I mean,
Mhm.
what I've seen typically is that there's an idea they're very passionate about. The idea seems new to the market, right? It's never seen before,
Mm.
and you just chase that idea. What a lot of founders don't really sign up for is what you just mentioned. How can I possibly be responsible for a team of, 20, 50, 100, depending on what rate you're scaling at, and how they perceive success, how they look at the startup? How can I possibly be? Isn't that too much of pressure on entrepreneurs?
It is absolutely. I think entrepreneurs go through a lot of pressure. They have to keep the game face on. So, that is really, and to some extent, I would say it is mostly genuine, maybe sometimes fake.
Hmm.
But, I think just revisiting why they're doing it and why they believe in what they're doing
Hmm.
is the only thing which can keep bringing them back to that sense of optimism.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
99 people are telling you you can't do this, it's impossible, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And you have to still stand up and say, no, I believe I can do it. It can
Mm-hmm.
only come if you have a number one very strong belief, which,
Mm.
which is what is reflecting to your team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Otherwise, they have not seen the end outcome that you have seen in your head
Yeah.
or in your dream. It's you can visualize that company.
Yeah.
Nobody else can. It's finally your belief and your optimism that is going to convey
Mm-hmm.
that, that is a reality or a possibility.
Yeah.
Otherwise, people are going to give up way before, and you'll never have a team that's galvanized to action,
Yeah.
uh, with all the disappointment. So, so the getting back on the saddle is, in some ways is not only for yourself, but it's also for the people around you,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
right? And because the longer you take to get on, the more flux you're creating in the system where people are wondering, hey, is are these founders ever going to feel like fully energized to run? And then, that mood permeates very quickly.
Hmm. No,
Right?
that's true. And just that sense of doom,
Mhm.
if you're
Mhm.
not able to get back on the saddle, in your words, uh, it just prevails all across. And I
Yeah.
think that further brings the energy down. And it's like a vicious cycle then.
Yeah.
And that keeps going on until you do something very deliberate to break through that and
Mhm.
emerge on the other side, saying that, what, yes, there was a lull, but now things are going to look different. And here is how we're going
Mhm.
to do about it.
Yeah.
Coming back to your book, Rahul, Tightrope to the Moon, you've written so many beautiful things about entrepreneurial traits and some of the things that a founder needs to be able to do to succeed. And I'm looking at success as a traditional definition of success, which means either you are looking at X revenue, or you're making a unicorn of your startup, or you've achieved that goal that you had in mind, and you've steadfastly in that sense, right? So, coming to that, when you were writing about this, were you drawing on your own personal experiences? Is there anything that you've experienced that made you relate to this topic even closer in that sense? Because I think every author kind of draws that from within and then puts something out there, right? So, what have been your experiences around this?
Yeah. I mean, of course, it's like at least, if not more, maybe 3,000 founders at reasonably close range, and then at least 100 founders over 10 years
Mm-hmm.
of seeing them go through their journeys. I think in my case, I'd started a fund in 2006, venture fund. Started something in 2020. And I would say the difference between the two was that the second one was much harder to do than the first one. And
Okay.
it was in an environment which had people running away from COVID. The world was uncertain.
Mm-hmm.
And then what you're, what you're taking to, or what you're trying to convince people is to help you put together a fund by giving you capital to be deployed
Mm-hmm.
in a very uncertain period, right? And
Yeah.
and that takes time. And when it takes time, then you need to again question whether you really want to do it. Is it's when are you likely to give up on this?
Yeah.
And what was the closest for me feeling like a startup founder,
Mm.
because startup founders also go through periods where one day is awesome, the next day is so bad that it doesn't look like it's going to happen. So I was going through that ups and downs also very frequently. And then I needed to again feel optimistic and get back to my belief that no, I'm supposed to do this,
Hmm.
have to do this, and then not giving up. I mean, again, first funds usually take a long time. In
Yeah.
COVID, it's even harder. So, being the number of times you have to say the same story to hundreds of people, and in all parts of the world, it needs a lot of revisit to going back to your source. So
Hmm.
yeah, it's not as intense, but I think in terms of just keeping the belief through very uncertain times, and that was certainly I felt also, and I think it helped me write the book.
Hmm. Yeah. And what I'm also hearing is a lot of conviction in what you're doing. I think everybody needs to have that, whether we are talking about a founder or a leader or a venture capitalist, right? I think we all need to have the kind of conviction that is required in order to continue building upon what we've started, because it's easier to give in and say that, you know what, no, I'm going to go to something that is comfortable. But I think the reason we've chosen what we've chosen is because there is an innate need or a desire to challenge the status quo, to do something that has maybe not been done before, or maybe to do it differently than what has been tried out there. So I think that inherent trait always remains, right? Coming back to where we started, the whole thing around your childhood response to stress. Have you come across any stories or conversations, that you've had where that actually worked against the founders' mindsets, that did not help them get to where they needed to be? Because we always talk about the success stories, but behind every one, we know there are 99 others which did not go through. Uh, we do know that your childhood experiences shape you as a human being, right? And as an adult. So, have you seen cases where it has not really worked out that well, the stress response?
Yeah, actually, in all, see, it's a double-edged sword, right? The ability to get over any kind of stress is a double-edged response, because while you win, you also become you do it with a certain sense of delusion,
Hmm.
right? So the ability to overcome something bigger than yourself, uh, I mean, in most parts, you're doing it in your mind,
Yeah.
right? It's not like those forces really exist, and you're not, a Jedi Knight actually destroying something. You're just destroying something in your head.
Hmm.
The uh, the plateauing out of startups, or a lot of decline of startups, uh, can be linked back to, um, I would say, two things. One is um, founders finding a more, like you said, a more comfortable, safer place in, um, let's say, in net worth build, which is good enough for them, but clearly not creating
Hmm.
a company that's going to change the world, or not going
Hmm.
to create wealth for hundreds of people.
Hmm.
So a lot of people check in early, and partly it is to do with when they're over indexing their need to build, let's say, for monetary reasons, right? And which was a stress in childhood. And you said, okay, if the day I have a fancy car, I'm going to be done. And
Hmm.
realize that that actually has come true, and then they don't have that much more motivation to keep going forward.
Hmm.
So whereas if the car had flipped out, and it was, like I've written in the book, that one of the kids who was going through that kind of stress kept leveling up from I want the car to I want the shop that sells the car to I want the factory that makes the car.
Delhi Daredevil. Correct.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So
Yeah.
so
But
Delhi
that,
Daredevil, absolutely. So if they can't, if they stop at I'm just happy with this, then it plateaus out, and but again, nothing wrong with that, but from a what could have been an amazing outcome, it becomes a good outcome.
Yeah, and I think for each one of them, success is what you define it to be, right? And I have come across a lot of entrepreneurs who are very, very happy with what they've done. They don't appear in any media. They don't appear in, any of the big events. None of that. But they know that they've made a difference, a meaningful difference in that sense. And that's where I think that whole thing around what's my why, as we come back to that, right? If you're very clear about that, and if you don't get into the race of being the biggest or being the bestest, or the traditional definition of success, you're able to achieve a lot more if you just keep going and carving your way, rather than constantly comparing yourself to others or setting up in terms of market expectations of what is expected of you. Uh, on another note, as I was just reading about our whole Bollywood movie industry, if you think about it, is going through a crunch time of its own, because a lot of people are saying that creativity has gone to the dogs, and we're just copy pasting success formulas. And I think I could relate that to the startup world as well. Are you doing that is different? Are you doing something that is different, or are you just copy pasting something, giving it a little bit of a twist and calling it something different and saying, "Hey, it's new to the market," you know? So I think are you just following someone's footsteps, or are you really doing something that you are truly passionate about?
That's the beauty about, I think, entrepreneurship, right? Is the most naked under the spotlight you can put
Mm.
yourself. And again, there is absolutely no external benchmark. Uh, one of the things, one of the chapter is about goal setting, and goal setting is very interesting phenomena for founders, because again, nobody, it's not an exam. It's not like you are prescribed that you must do this, or this is the
Mhm.
minimum you have to do. There's nothing, right? So, but they are always, putting two things together, right? One is they want to succeed, so they don't want to fail. And that's like, again, very important, right? They just want to succeed, or actually put better, they don't want to fail.
Mm.
And they combine that with goals which are impossible to achieve.
Mm.
Right? So this is to me one of the most freaky combination in a founder's head, which is I don't want to fail, but I'm going to pick a goal for myself, which is so impossible.
Mm.
Like why?
Why?
For me, that's one of the most fascinating thing about. But I think I have not met a ex-founder or founder who's unhappy or frustrated, or haven't done enough in life, because I think irrespective of the outcome, big, small, zero, I think the lasting mental condition after doing a startup is that you really put yourself out there, you really took on an impossible task,
Mm-hmm.
and you gave it your best. So I
Yeah.
think in terms of could I have done better? Could I have, of course, there are mistakes you remember, but in terms of risk taking, it's one of the biggest risk taking that, we can do in human life. And I think that's a lasting source of happiness, which is, you put yourself out there.
Yeah. And I think it goes on to build your resilience at a whole different level.
Mhm.
I've gone through this. I think I can now take whatever life brings me, because I think the entire attitude of, if plan A is not working, I'm going to pivot to B. If that
Mhm.
doesn't work, I'm going to pivot to C. Because one thing I'm very clear about is I'm not shutting it down until I've gone from A to Z.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. And when you really run out of options, which is very rare, by the way, because if you're constantly pivoting, you
Mhm.
will find something that works out for you, right? Uh,
Mhm.
but when you really run out of options, or if you run out of fuel, your risk-taking ability has dipped. And I think a lot of other factors also come into play, including personal situations, right? Which where that dip can happen is
Yeah.
to truly say, okay, I'm done for now. Maybe I'll
Mhm.
revisit later. So I think that just builds you up as a very different human being as such, and you become like a role model to people in that sense.
Mhm.
Because so what if it did not succeed the first time? There's always the second time that I'm looking at. So
Yeah.
as we always say, right, you really fail when you stopped trying. Until then, you're just trying. And that's something that I even share with leaders when I catch up, because I'm like, until If you tell me today that I've done it in the past and now, I'm unable to do it, but if you restart, then you'd just taken a pause. You'd not stop, right? So I think that's the whole mindset that entrepreneurs also have, and I've seen that as well a few times, in the sense that they pivoted in order to get to where they need to be. So great. Uh, Rahul, if there is one mindset shift or maybe habits that you've encountered where you believe that every founder, or really any dreamer, because I think founders are really dreamers essentially, should adapt to building that sustainable resilience that we were talking about, what should that be?
Again, I think I've seen mishaps which included uh, being 1 week away from basically no cash in the company to even make payroll, or suddenly in your head you're worth 500 crores, but 1 week later you're worth 5 rupees,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have to climb back from that, right? So it's a very, very steep fall in how you see the world, how you see yourself. And the one thing I've seen, which is common for people who do a great job in eventually building very big outcomes,
Mm.
is their ability to switch between a telescope and a binocular or a microscope,
Yeah.
right? So in that instance, if they are not picking up the telescope, then they're going to miss out what's going to come ahead,
Yeah.
right? What's in store. And if you keep holding on to that binocular or microscope and you're only looking at the situation. So again, in the 10-year journeys I've taken with founders, right? At the worst times, when you look back at it 2 years from then, it looks like a very small blip. In fact, it is a much smaller blip compared to where you are right now, probably.
So true.
And that time it looked like a very big hole,
Mm-hmm.
right? So two things. One is a bigger hole is coming. So this is not the biggest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the second thing is when you look back, it look very small.
Yeah. Yeah. So
And yeah. And I mean, another way of saying the telescope bit is that I've seen a lot of people actually think about capitulating and saying, let's say somebody is saying, hey, you're in so much trouble, I'll come and buy you for X. When your worth is 50X, and
mm-hmm.
you said, it's okay, I will agree because, I don't think I can get to the 50.
Mm.
And then again, the folks who do bounce back actually never buy into that X. They will always believe in that 50 and they get there. So, not uh, shortchanging yourself or what you built or is always dependent on how you see how valuable it is. And at that point, it is not looking valuable.
Yeah.
And people are telling you it's not valuable, so you might as well shut it or get out, and it's sunk cost, etc. But you know how valuable it is, and you know that it'll be worth that much, so you stay on. So I think that where it will be is what you see from the telescope, which is where am I going to be.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that very strong belief in your, you know, in what you've set out to do
Mhm.
is really critical, is what I'm hearing over here.
At that point, when things are actually looking like, even when you are a few days from shutting down, you're still valuing what you built.
Mm-hmm.
That time it may look, hey, it's just a write-off,
Yeah.
right? And it is not amounting to much because I thought I had, the whole thing figured out, but in 7 days I'll have to shut all this down.
Yeah.
So what is it even worth? Because it's just going to be shut off next week.
Yeah.
The At that point, if you can say no, no, no. I mean, even if it shuts down, what this is worth today is a lot. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to believe anyone who says this is a piece of scrap.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have again the power to say, this is where I can take it. So most people, yeah, I think climb out of holes because then they can, they can see so far out, which people around them can't.
Yeah, exactly. And that becomes so invaluable
Mhm.
in terms of maybe your next venture, even if this one did not pan out the way you wanted to, maybe the next one. So yeah, I love that parallel that you draw between the long-term vision, which is the telescope, and the here and the now, which is your microscope, right? And just shuttling between the two and making sure that you always have one or the other, and you know when to switch, you know when to. And I think as a founder, sometimes what happens is either people become too big picture or they become too small, okay, this is the goal, let's just go with this. Very hands-on, as we say, right? So I think that becomes a bit challenging. So great. Thank you so much for sharing that. And Rahul, it's been a wonderful conversation. And I hope to bring you up real soon with another book of yours with more insights into it. So thank you. Thank you for showing up today.
Thank you, Ruti. Thanks.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. All the best.
Thanks. Can you unpack that a little bit for us?